thank you very much for coming and joining us here tonight. I'm Linda. I'm with Small Improvements, and Small Improvements is a performance feedback solution to help companies communicate better and capture ongoing feedback. And we have the opportunity to work with some of the most amazing and innovative people in the HR industry around the world, and we get asked quite often, what do other companies do? What do other companies have in place and training, and how can we help our managers to become better? So we thought, why not put up a roadshow and get our amazing network to share, communicate, and learn from each other. So thank you very much for joining me today. Hey! I do like applause. Cool, so maybe to kick off, would you mind please introducing yourselves one by one? Should we start with you, Michaela?
Hello. Hi, I'm Michaela McDonald, and I run the Pinner operations team at Pinterest. I've been in that role for about 9 months, and we're building a catalog of ideas.
Fantastic.
Hello. Hi. I'm Caitlin Holloway. I'm the VP of People and Culture at Reddit. We are in the process of changing and evolving, not just who we are online, but who we are internally. So I've been in the people space for a long time now, at a number of different startups, and started my career at Pixar. So been around the block a few times.
I'm Kim. I'm the Director of People Ops at Discuss. We're a commenting and discussion platform for the open and diverse web. Ooh, new catchphrase. And yeah, did I get it? I'm very spacey, I'm sorry.
You have the Pinterest logo on your face. That is the funniest thing of it all.
Great, I'll just do
You did
this.
not sit, oh, now you have Discuss on your arm. That's cool, that's cool.
Yes, please.
Hi everyone, my name's Bob Leto. I'm actually between gigs right now, but have about 15 years of recruiting and HR experience, most recently at a Discuss partner called DataSift, where we grew from about 70 to 160 while I was there.
Great. Yes, thank you very much. So Michaela is a manager, and the other three have managerial positions as well as the HR title. So just a little bit of a background. How many, sorry? Dual hats, yeah. How many HR people do we have in the room? Oh, that is a lot. How many non-HR? Okay, cool. And who of those, keep your hands up please for a second, who of those is a manager? Great, so we do actually have a lot of non-managers as well. Exciting, exciting. Helping managers become great. Sorry about that little Creative Cloud attempted to access. Turn that off. Yes, you can probably turn that off. The one thing that is kind of a little bit important on there is the hashtag manager tips, just in case you did want to tweet. As I mentioned, we're looking into finding patterns and how to help managers and want to build a community around that. So if you want to tweet around that, use that. Yay! Much better. Cool. So, to start off with, why don't we start with defining what makes a manager great? What is it that makes a manager great for your organization and maybe in general? And is there a difference?
So I think one of the things that makes a manager great is having empathy. I think really caring about people and having the ability to build trust is probably the most important part of being a great manager.
I think that was probably all of our first go-to answers. So I'll take it to the more unique characteristic from my point of view. I think that some of the best managers that I've worked with are really incredible matchmakers. And I don't just mean that in terms of finding the right chemistry or the right DNA on a team to help balance it, but really also able to match craft. So having enough technical depth in whatever the function is, and being able to match the skill set to tackle those problems, but also the chemistry on the team, so the actual interpersonal chemistry.
And I would add to that, just like build the layers here. Follow through is the biggest manager trait that I find myself trying to teach. You can have all the empathy in the world, but if you don't do anything with it, you're not going to have the trust of your employees or HR?
Well, since I'm not with a company right now, I think my first inclination is to say, I think it depends on the company you're at. Like, what's a great person, what a great manager at Disqus is going to be different, most likely. I mean, there's some universal traits, but then when it gets down to kind of brass tacks, it's going to look really different within the company and the culture that you're in. That being said, I mean, yeah, I echo everything what you just said. I guess there's a couple other words I would say, like accountability. I mean, you started on it, Kim, but I think kind of like taking it through, like there needs to be kind of trust in your team, but you need to also have accountability, and you need to be able to provide feedback to, course correct if people are on the right track or if they need to improve or move.
Mm-hmm. So we thought that it would be a nice idea to start with the name tags and put some what makes a manager great and outstanding on there. So if we go through, who has empathy on their card? Oh, okay, not that many. Okay. What about caring? Trust? Trust is a big one. Okay, cool. Follow through, accountability. Great. Communication. I've seen a few of those. Awesome. So this is like what makes a manager great in general. And then how does it differ from organization to organization? What does it particularly look like for Pinterest? You're managing managers and training them?
Yeah, I would say that I would follow up with the flexibility. I think that's really important. And I think a lot of it depends on the team. I led an intellectual property policy team at Twitter for about 5 years, and they were a lot more senior than my current team, and that requires a completely different set of manager skills and tactics, I think. There's a lot more, there's a lot less of that sort of, traditional servant based leadership where you have these experts and you make sure there's no blockers and you just support them. Whereas now I think that there's more requests for structure and there's more need for sometimes help when people get stuck. So I think that being flexible for what they need is pretty important.
Mm-hmm. What do you think?
So Reddit is in a really interesting, unique place. As I mentioned in my intro, the company is in a place of evolution. So I joined the team in January, and our original founders returned to the company about 6 months prior to that. And so the year before I joined, our company had 3 different full administration leadership groups come through. So that was a lot of change in a very, very short period of time. Our company is 11 years old, 11 and a half, and there has not been a ton of outward change from a product standpoint. Our community has grown, but internally, there was a lot of kind of turnover and a lot of friction because of the different administrators and what they brought to the table, their philosophies. And so when I joined the team, the thing that I was looking for most in our managers and the kind of the matchmaking that I was talking about before was really that ability to hold the company together, really drill down and be able to define our values. So I needed our managers to be walking versions of Reddit's values, and knowing that that foundation was in place to then be able to bridge the gap between the immense amount of growth that we have had. So since January, I think we've had about 45% growth, which is a lot of new blood to add to the mix for a team who had been through a lot. So for my managers at this period of time, really being able to bridge the gap between the people that had come before and that had built the platform to what it was to the time when the new people could join in. And so really, it's really interesting to sit in a room with an employee who's been at a company for 11 years and someone who's been there for 11 days and try to have the conversation go in the right way and to try to get the 2 parties or the 12 parties, whatever it is, to align around what the right decision was to move the ball down the field. And so there's a lot in there, but really at the stage where we are looking for people who can be the voice of the past and be the voice of the future at the same time, which is a really unique skill set.
That's a fun job. I'm so impressed with you, Caitlin. We'll just have a love fest up here for the next hour. I think one of the challenges that we see with managers, and something that's really important for us at Discuss, is being able to balance your workload between being a manager and being an individual contributor. Every one of our managers started out as an individual contributor and took on management duties in addition to, not instead of, their full-time regular jobs. And about 80% of them, perhaps, are also members of our executive team. So there's this very difficult balancing act between, for most of them, being an executive level strategist, also having your own individual contributor workload to accomplish, and then also finding some brain space to remember that you have a management job that means taking care of people, and not just delegating your work to them. And so being able to strike that balance between 2 or 3 very different jobs is super important to our team. And when we are trying to create a new manager out of nowhere, we often have to look at, well, not just who could potentially have the bandwidth, but who is willing to wear both of those hats at once. Because often people who are really strong individual contributors don't have any interest in becoming managers. We see this especially in engineering, which is why we have 1 manager for 20 engineers. Nobody wants to stop coding to be a manager, but that's a really important distinction to note when you are figuring out what are the qualities in a manager and who should be a manager. If they don't want to do it, you shouldn't make them do it, because they won't be good at it, they won't want to be good at it, and they won't be great at it.
My last company had quite a bit of leadership change as well. We had 3 CEOs in 14 months. Needed to find our way, and it finally gave us the opportunity to really do something that I wanted to do for a long time, and that was to really articulate what our values were as a company. That was challenging because we were a multi-country company, and you have different functions in different countries, and culture and all that kind of came into it. But the point of bringing it up is the values, I think, are the starting place where you can label and come up with kind of common agreement on what are the behaviors that support your values as an individual contributor, and what are the values that support as a manager and as an executive. And it sounds, Kim, like you have, if someone's having to rotate through the 3 of those in a day, which is probably happens more often than we realize, it's pretty tricky. But the behaviors are really distinct. And I think a big common problem that almost all new managers have is that, what made me successful as an individual contributor is not going to make me successful as a manager. Sometimes someone knows that, sometimes they don't know that. But I think it's our natural tendency. So again, I think it kind of comes down to, I think it starts with the executive leadership, the founders, depending on the size of your company, but there needs to be that agreement about what does success look like, and what are the behaviors that support that success.
And I would add, it's really helpful when the execs and the people team come up with really strong paths for ICs to grow without having to become managers, because if that's not the right path for you, and you still have a path as an IC, you won't be sort of shepherded into a role that isn't right for you, which is something that is really helpful that an HR team can kind of do for us.
Yeah, and you're looking at that quite a bit at Pinterest, right? We spoke about that before, and you went as far as saying it is a disservice to the organization to just have the career ladder. And it just was what it was before, right? There is one way up. And now how can we show that individual contributors do not have to become managers? So you're also working on that, Caitlin, a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that it sounds like we're all in pretty much agreement. So we aren't going to have a lot of heated debate here for you tonight, unfortunately.
Boring.
I know, right? We can stage something. It'll be fine. Yeah. Disagree. No, I think that I will absolutely echo that sentiment. I very intentionally build career ladders that have the dual path. They are parallel, and it is communicated early and often to not just people who are interested in management or not just existing managers, but also people that are individual contributors that are considering what they may want to do. So at Reddit, we actually have an exploratory option. We call it the Apprenticeship Manager Program, where anyone who's like, I'm actually just kind of curious, or maybe I'd like to grow in this area, or I just want to understand the toolkit that my manager is using with me so that we have the same language, whatever their interest. It's a no-fail program. You come in, you acquire the tools, you test them out. You can road test them by being a tech lead or by managing a certain project, or something that is maybe not super consequential to the business, but something that is important to the company at that moment. So there's a little bit of ownership, a little bit of accountability, but really it's about learning the language and understanding the tools so that they can try it out, and then communicating to everyone within the organization that it's not failure if you don't choose it. So one, the pay must be parity across the entire ladder. Two, there must be different milestones in which you can pop in or pop out of that track. So if you're on a sprint cycle, after a feature launch, however your company is organized, there are built-in milestones that you can pause and reflect and say, hey, is now the right time? Is this something you'd like to continue to do? Would you like to do it on this next journey? And then letting people really lead the way. So to Kim's earlier point of if someone's heart is not in it, it's not going to work, whatever it may be. And there are two very different sides of your brain that you use when you are, say, coding than when you are sitting and giving a feedback conversation. So creating a ladder that is, one, transparent, and two, fair and equitable so that you can jump back and forth. Your pay doesn't go down or up. It just is the same no matter which side of the track you're on. So I think that's important.
Yeah, it is. And is that similar to what you guys are doing?
And also we have an exploratory class like that as well, and I think it's really helpful because if you come out of that class going, that is not for me, that's great to know that information. So I think that, and we've been working really hard to have an IC path that is equal, and I think that that really takes the pressure off of people going into management when it's not the right thing for them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And to your earlier point, you said that this is one thing that HR can do to help you as a manager. What else can HR do to support managers? Maybe we start with you, Bob or Kim.
Bob's holding the microphone, so.
What can HR do to help managers become better? What are some things that you have maybe explored and that worked or that didn't work?
Well, I think it starts with listening, right? I mean, I think it was a HBR. I don't know where I heard it first, but it's like, don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem, right? So, I mean, so often we kind of go in with just a hammer or with a saw or whatever, right? So, with the experience, we get more and more things in our toolbox that we can use to, apply to solutions. But I think it really starts with, like this gentleman here puts on, listening as the skill. It starts with listening and really understanding what the problem is. That makes sense?
One thing that we started doing pretty early on, several years ago, when we realized we had more than like 2 managers all of a sudden. HR does monthly one-on-ones with all of our managers, and some of them who have larger teams, we do them every 2 weeks. And in that session, I have sort of my short list of things that I want to know about as HR. I want to know who are your rock stars and like the people we can't afford to lose because they're so amazing. Who are the people that are struggling? And then with those people that are struggling, what are we doing as a company to help them out of that struggle? And with the people who are doing really well, how are we recognizing that performance? So I call it like my secret stealthy manager coaching, because they don't know that they're in a coaching session. They think that's just their one-on-one to like talk about their team. But very often I find myself saying, like, they know who's good and who's struggling, but they're not thinking about like, when's the last time I recognized someone on my team for doing a really good job? Should we be thinking about their compensation? Should we be thinking about a promotion? Should we be thinking about a spot bonus or calling them out at an all-hands meeting? And then for the people who are really struggling, I mean, I was just going through this earlier this week with a manager who was like, we got to do something about this person. I was like, what would you like to do about it? And I could tell that what he wanted to do about it was like punish him in some way. I was like, that's not how we do things. You know this. I know you're frustrated, but what is the skill that is lacking? How can we increase that competency? And that gets them thinking. Like I said, you know, what if we did some sort of mentorship or coaching, or put them through a program? They're like, oh yeah, +1 on coaching. Not from me, but from somebody else. I'm like, exactly. Like they need an external coach, because clearly. But doing that work with the managers, it feels a little handholdy sometimes. But when you have a small group of managers, or new managers especially, like an initial manager training is not going to be enough. You need to reinforce that message by having frequent meetings where you put the questions that you need answered into their minds, right? Like on a regular basis. Ideally, I would love it if they were always coming to me and being like, I want to talk to you about my team and who's doing well and what we need to change. Like that would be great, but they're not going to do that if I don't ask them. So I know what I need from them, and sometimes you just have to be super direct and remind them that my job is to make your job easier. If you don't tell me things, I can't make your job easier.
Yeah. Great, and I love that. Meanwhile, monthly one-on-ones between HR and managers. Is anyone else doing that from you guys? Yep. You were? Yep.
I actually do weeklies.
Weekly with every manager.
So I have, I know, I love people. At Reddit, on our people and culture team, we've actually stacked our deck from a people and culture perspective, less on the recruiting side and more on the internal, what a lot of companies call HR business partners, or the people that are going in and coaching and counseling and working alongside the managers. And we very intentionally did that so that I could afford this time with my manager. As this team goes through this phase in its life cycle, it was far more critical to me to create a healthy organization than it was to go out and be in the business of people sales and like just try to fill seats with butts, which is fun too. But I really subscribe to the if you build it, they will come mentality. So by focusing on the people that we have, not the people that we want to have, I think that that's a better business advantage and a more strategic advantage for the company. And so at this point in Reddit's life cycle, I actually have a team large enough to have weekly one-on-ones with each of our people managers and to really be able to dive into these things. It's far more proactive, it's not reactionary, and it also changes the relationship between the HR team and the managers and the employees ultimately, because you aren't just talking with HR when you're in trouble or when you have a complaint or you're at your wit's end and it's time to go. So for us, we view performance management more as an ongoing conversation, and I know that this is something, sorry, name drop, small improvements, that we're working on together to help facilitate that conversation. So giving a tool to the managers, not just in conversation, but in actual tactical, like follow-up, how do we get from point A to point B with this individual? Suddenly the conversation becomes much more healthy and it becomes much more natural when you're doing it more frequently. That's what my organization needs right now. I think that bi-weekly or whatever is right for your team is right for your team, but that's where we are.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of other things, since I have a room of HR people, so other things we'd like.
Yes.
So I think that I really like the idea of meeting regularly. That's great. Also, all the tools and systems and processes are so helpful to have fair and equitable promotions. I think it's really important to be calibrated across the company, not just for feedback, but for performance. Like there's performance overall, but also like management training. One of the really great things that Pinterest is doing right now, which is Joel runs these wonderful management trainings that has a bunch of executives that come and speak. And so it isn't just helpful for new managers, but it's helpful for any manager to come in and go, oh, this is Pinterest's philosophy towards management. And also, like, this is how our management team views it, and it gives you just a really great insight and the belief that our executive team has really bought into the importance of having strong managers.
Awesome, I love it. But let's stick with that, because that whole training, like there is, you all do initial training when someone starts, and does that training look different for someone that is coming from the organization and becoming a manager, or someone that is hired from outside?
I have one training, and every manager gets one training, the same one, mostly because I realized that our managers weren't receiving any training at all, and I said, you know, my one basic manager training is better than no training at all, so I made one up based on what my beliefs were on what Disqus needed from its managers. it's very basic. It's very like, here's how we approach ongoing performance development. Here are the basics that you need to know about California labor law and when to escalate to HR. Here are the trigger points that you need to be aware of. Here's how we deal with promotions. Here's how we deal with terminations. It's really geared towards, I think this is like the first slide of my presentation. It says it doesn't matter how long you've been managing, you've never managed here before. And so some of this stuff might not be new to you. You might know that, short-term disability kicks in after 5 days. You might know that, but you might not. But you don't know how we approach things, and you don't know what's expected of you here. And that's the most important thing for me, is to set the expectation right at the beginning that as a manager, these are the things you are expected to do. This is what I, as HR, will be holding you accountable for. And then it's a really fun 90-minute training with me in a conference room by yourself most of the time. But then they've had that training, and I share the slide deck with them afterwards. It has all my notes in it, so they can refer to it if they need to. But after that initial training point, they're kind of on their own, except for our regular checkups. We've been building an online toolkit, but it's all very self-service. And we're working on ways to make it more proactive and inclusive, and like have the whole group go through something together and bond them as managers, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, well, you were saying that you had some manager lunches as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
On the Slack channel, maybe?
For a little while, we no longer have this group, but for a while we had a group of about 6 or so mid-level managers that were managers who were not executives, and we put them together. This is where I get loopy in HR world, so I'm like, it's the mid-level managers chit-chat. Everybody come together for a chit-chat. And they were like, Kim, what are you? Fine. But they really, really fucking loved it. And so there. They had lunches that were about every 3 weeks or so. And the only rule was if you are a manager, you come to this, but your boss does not come. So it was that mid-level of managers with no level up above them there. So they could talk freely with each other about their challenges, about things that were going on their teams, about approaches they were trying that worked or didn't work. And they really loved it. It was a really nice little safe space to talk about manager problems. And sometimes I would go to them and sometimes I wouldn't, kind of depending on what they were talking about. Sometimes they were like, we can do it on our own. We're going to have lunch. And I was like, oh, you're going to talk about HR, aren't you? Like, all right. I can see all of the notes that you take. They're fun. But we got to a point where, because of structural changes internally, there were only 2 people left at that level. And so the lunches kind of fizzled out. They didn't do them anymore. But now we're starting to rebuild that middle tier. And actually we have a whole crop of people that are not personnel managers, but are project managers or technical leads, or kind of this mid-level of semi-managerial, semi-leadership roles. So we're trying to figure out a new way to support that level that's not necessarily personnel related, but is very important leadership-wise. And we need to find a way to support that group as well.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
I think that's a really great thing to do, because, again, I think a common problem with new managers in particular is they've been an individual contributor, perhaps, right, unless they were hired from the outside, and they're friends with the people that they're now managing. And so you can see where these conversations go, right? But the relationship is changed, and the companies, effective companies, are going to create that new network for them to be able to network with and be able to share. You need to be able to make new friends. Totally, you definitely do. I agree. I mean, we did the same thing at DataSift. I mean, I think regardless of someone's experienced or not experienced, there needs to be a reset. And it's again, like, what is management at your company? And if they're very experienced, it's going to be reset. If they're newer, hopefully it's building, but it's that foundation that you can start upon. And then, all your, whatever the cadence is, your one-on-ones and buildings are, build up from that foundation afterwards.
Yeah, so that managers know what is expected from them, and hopefully they get recognized for the right things as well. So one-on-ones came up a couple of times. How important are they for managers?
Very.
Oh. Next question. What do you do?
I think one-on-ones are really, really important. I think that I always make sure that I'm available every week. I mean, it's an open floor plan and you're sort of around all the time, but to dedicate either 30 minutes or an hour to somebody every week and to really give them your attention and your and just listening to what they have to say, I think is really, really crucial. It's like in that moment, you can get so much done around any budding misalignment or anything like that. It's even just beyond, career development and all the ways that we think about one-on-ones and all the possibility that they have. There's just something about being in a room. I was just talking to somebody about this recently. You're almost better off like having 10 minutes of like having to deal with the awkwardness of trying to get to it than to not have one-on-ones. They're just so important to connecting with your report and making them know that you're there.
I agree. What I found when I first started managing myself, I found that my conversations with my team members would be one of two things. Either incredibly conversational, and we would talk about what we did that weekend and kind of what things were going on in the office and just kind of general things, or they became very tactical, which was very checklisty and like, okay, what do you need from me? Great, check, 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 let's move on. And then they would leave and I would be like, oh, we didn't even talk about how you are doing or your career development or all of the other things. And so for me, and it's different for every manager, but a tool that I found very useful is simply having a structured email that goes, that the employee sends to me before their time. And for me, in my organization, the employee owns this one-on-one. I don't own it. I don't drive the agenda. So what they will do is they will send me an email the day before, the hour before, that says, this is where I need your help. So that's the tactical stuff. These are the roadblocks that I'm running into. These are the things that are going really well. These are the things that I accomplished this week, because oftentimes you don't talk about successes either because there isn't enough time because you're trying to problem solve. And then the third question is anything else, like anything else that you want to make sure we cover during this time. And what I find that does, even though it feels a little heavy in the beginning, what it does is it actually allows the employee to guide the conversation in the way they want. So they aren't just trying to please me or just get what they need and get out of the room. And then we actually usually cover that in the first 15 minutes. And then the last 15 minutes can be lovely. And it's, what can I do for you? Where are you going? What do you think about this? Or here's an interesting challenge this team is facing. What are your thoughts on that? And then you have a more interesting, diverse conversation. And then they actually start looking forward to having them. And they realize that something is actually coming out of that meeting. It's not just, okay, so context shift. I've been, in the code all day, or I've been working on this project, and now I have to lift my head up and, oh shit, my boss, and okay, fine. So if you help them to structure and give them a framework, whatever that looks like for you, some people use a tool called 15-5. The email works just fine for me, but whatever it is to help them getting to think about it, even if you say, these are the things that I want to cover and have them just list it in the beginning, I found that to be very helpful and the conversation is more productive.
Yeah, fantastic. And you, Kim, you have like a whole bunch of hacks for one-on-ones, right?
I can't take credit for any of this hack. I just want to put that out there at the beginning. Somebody sent me a Google Doc of one-on-one feedback hacks. And it's one of our tools in our manager toolkit. I'm happy to share it with anyone who wants a copy of it.
Recording.
Oh, good. Great. That's on the record. It's basically we have this basic one-on-one format that is similar to Caitlin's. It's what's going well, what are you struggling with, and how can I help you? Because I find that it's important to be able to have an open space to talk about your challenges in a safe way. That when you're not necessarily looking for a solution. You're just, this is a problem I have, and then sometimes the follow up of what can I help you with as your manager. Sometimes that's a solution to that problem. Sometimes it's something totally different. I know often with my manager, who is our CEO, and is relatively uninvolved with my day to day. Sometimes I just have to vent for 20 minutes. And I'm like, I want to preface this venting session by saying, I don't need you to help me. I just need you to know my mental state right now. And it's really helpful to have that context shift, because then he's not listening to me trying to figure out how he can solve the problem. He's actually listening to my problem. And so being really clear about what you want to get out of the one-on-one is really important. But on this hacks workshop or worksheet, in addition to the standard questions, and we had a fourth thing, which is don't forget to ask your direct report a question about their career. Doesn't matter what it is, but like, how are they liking their current workflow? Do they like their job? Do they see themselves here in a few years? Do they want to completely shift directions and work on something else? Because I don't think they should only talk about their career at their performance reviews twice a year. But in addition to that, there's this whole like list of questions that somebody else came up with that are like ways to spice up your one-on-one if you're asking the same questions every week. And honestly, like I recommend this to people all the time because we make this toolkit available to managers and direct reports. It's for anyone that wants to take control of their one-on-ones. But even if you have kind of a set agenda of questions and you talk about different things every week, it can start to feel a little bit like this is our regular status update. We always talk about the same things. And so having a different set of questions to throw in there every once in a while can be really helpful. And of course, I can't think of any of them right now, but it's random things. Like, I think there was one about like, what was the most interesting thing that happened to you in your work this week? Instead of asking, you know, what went well, ask like, what was the most interesting thing? Or what was a challenge that you weren't expecting? And just ways to ask similar questions, but in different ways to make the conversation feel a little bit less like a checklist.
Awesome. Would love to
We give that out to everybody.
Nice.
I'll send it to you, Linda, and then you can
Yay!
share it.
Well, but also if you want to tweet it then to manager
share.
tips or just share it with us,
Hashtag management
we'll
tips.
happily share
Yeah.
that with anyone, for sure.
Can I give one last pro tip? It was one of the best pieces of advice I ever received from my mentor, and that was don't take any homework. Your job as a manager is to enable your team, not to solve their problems. So you alluded to that earlier with the fall in love with the solution, or fall in love with the problem, not the solution. So one mantra that I constantly have to repeat to myself when I'm meeting with my people is don't take homework. When someone's like, God, this person's really pissing me off, instead of my natural instinct, which is like, I'll go talk to him, I'll fix it for you. It's like, how can I best facilitate this conversation? How can I help you have the right conversation? So just remember, never take homework. And sometimes you will, but.
I also try not to assign homework. I mean, unless it's something that comes out of the conversation, I try not to go into the one-on-one with, oh, I'm gonna assign work or have it be associated with that. That this should be a conversation that really is driven by them and what they want to talk about and where they're headed.
Yeah, I mean, for me, both as a manager and as an HR leader, I mean, I don't think there's many things that are more important than the one-on-one, and I'm glad to see everyone kind of putting the importance there. I mean, for me, leading by example, I mean, it was kind of like sacred time. Like anything else could change on my calendar except for those one-on-ones, or if it needed to be moved, at least it didn't slip. So everyone on my team knew that I was there, and I like what everyone has said. You know, I mean, sometimes I never sent it out. I like that idea, but I didn't do it because I didn't want to have that homework. But at the same time, I like the idea of having kind of that structure. So you're not sending zingers to everyone to kind of know what to expect. But really, it's about being there for them. And sometimes it can be being there emotionally, and sometimes it's more about more tactical things. But I mean, it almost gets back to one of your first questions about what makes a great manager. I mean, I think if we're all doing our jobs right, it's about empowering the person in that meeting in some way.
Empowering anyone on their name tags? Yay! So what is the number one barrier then for managers to be successful? Where would you see the biggest problem lying?
For me, I think it comes down to, again, about what is important at the company. And right, I mean, I think so many companies, especially like in the tech sector, it's about just getting shit done and just, being fast, execute. But, getting back to your values and your behaviors and the mission of the company, like if people understand what it is to be a great manager, that becomes like all the activities associated with that are the most important thing the way that you can leverage yourself to be the most impactful for your company.
Again, back to this thing of managers who are not only managers. Time is such a huge barrier for us. We get in our twice a year engagement surveys, frequently our managers get really high ratings and people love their managers, but they have this caveat where they say, like, my manager is really great and our one-on-ones are awesome, but he never remembers what we talked about from week to week. Or we make all these really great plans, but there's no follow through. But I still really love my manager and he's like the best manager ever. It's like, those things don't really add up to me in HR of like being a great manager. And it's not because they don't care and it's not because they don't want to, it's just they just don't have the bandwidth.
Intention is there.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the player coach model that I think a lot of us have our managers in is a difficult one. And what I see oftentimes with my, especially newer managers, they really struggle with that balance where they don't actually feel productive when they are managing because they're used to actually producing something tangible where they can say, I shipped that piece of code or I launched that campaign or whatever the issue is. And so really for me that to overcome that challenge is about education and having a healthy dialogue amongst the whole company about the role of a manager and the importance of that role so that it's like, yeah, God, I spent my whole day in one-on-ones today. That's a very productive day. Just because you didn't ship code doesn't mean that wasn't productive. So I think it's an education piece for the whole organization, not just for the people doing the job.
I would also say that not all managers are extroverts, and not all. So there are definitely people who, they're organized, they're great, they're really good managers, but sometimes they can. So energy is actually a really hard thing for them, and maintaining. Maintaining what's needed to sort of inspire a team and do that work, I think it can be really exhausting. So I think self-care and also trying to figure out how to sort of do that part of the job can be really hard for some managers. But I don't think that being somebody who's really extroverted is actually always the only kind of manager. So I always am encouraging people to try that anyway. But I do think that there are aspects of it that can be exhausting for them in particular.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's sorry? You? I'm an introvert. Yes, certainly it isn't quite the right job for everyone, and it does take a very different skill set. I have 7 million other questions probably, but so do you maybe. So when we headed off to the audience now for audience questions, let us just go through here one more time. New managers came up earlier. I think that's a really big topic that I felt we might go further into, but maybe one tip, one hint that you had for new managers, what would that be?
I would say, just start with follow through. Like everybody, I think everybody sort of dreams of being the kind of person who people follow into the fire, but be the person who has water and gear and actually maybe even just, smoke detectors. Just be that person, and then start there.
Don't be afraid to document everything. I know. Take notes during your meeting so that you don't have to write them up later. Documentation is my biggest broken record thing for all managers. So when I have a new manager, I try to get them on the documentation bandwagon early. I don't practice what I preach personally. I have one-on-ones and I don't take notes after all of them, but every time there is a performance, something really great or something really bad, I make sure that I write it down and share it with the employee, and that you have to. And my poor fucking managers, they hear it every day, but it's so important, not just from an actual learning and development and cultural perspective, but from the legal cover your ass in court perspective too.
I put on my label here, I would say be curious. I was a psychology major way back when, and I always reference the capability model. It's we start with we don't know what we don't know, right? So you're unconsciously incompetent. You don't even know the questions to ask, right? And then as you mature, you become you realize, oh shit, I realize how much I don't know. Then, but you kind of get to that nirvana of like just being an awesome, great manager at the end. But just be curious, be open, and listen.
Okay, I have mine. Thanks, guys. Manage expectations. This is not a popularity contest. These are not necessarily going to be your friends. Hopefully you also become friends. We encourage those relationships, but manage expectations, because that's actually how you will earn trust in the long run. If you actually won't be able to deliver on something, say it, or say, I'm going to need twice that amount of time, or I'm going to look into that for you. Don't feel obligated to have every answer in the moment, and don't promise things that you can't deliver. So manage expectations. That's probably your number one job. And it's not just you to them, it's also the organization. And because as a manager, you have access to information that you wouldn't otherwise, because you're sitting in different meetings, you're having different conversations. And so by saying, actually, I know that this team is working on that, and there's a delay here. So when it comes time to your piece of the puzzle, there may be some frustration. So we're going to pause on this and recalibrate here. So manage expectations, not just emotionally, but also tactically.
Thank you very, very much. That has been really, really exciting. Thank you for all the sharing. We will pass it on to the audience. I mean, you can give them a round of applause if you like, because at this point, thank you very much. Questions?
Hello, I'm Edward. I actually work for TrueCar, more on the recruiting operations side of things, but want to get involved in more of HR and eventually be a head of people operations, my whole career development goal. But basically my question would be to you guys, it doesn't have to be where you're working right now, but for example, how have you actually ever handled a hiring manager leaving a position that left their whole team there, and then how do you set them up for success, the new hiring manager that came through?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is, yes, it happens. It happens. But it hasn't happened yet. It's going to happen soon. So I think it starts with like trying to diagnose why the person left. And sometimes you get the right answer, and sometimes you get a politically correct answer. But just really understanding the organizational health of that team. Maybe it was a wrong fit. Maybe the person, you just really need to understand their motivation for leaving their team, because that's kind of a big deal. And then, just working on, assuming you're going to replace that position, just, making sure that chemistry-wise, you are recruiting for the right set of traits to set that team up for success. And give them a lot of love in the meantime.
So I actually have encountered this problem a few times. It's the orphan syndrome, is what I call it. I love orphans. They are truly, it is one of, given the worst case scenario, which is when you have, oh, excuse me, sorry. Thank you. I'm awesome. Yeah, exactly. Tell me about it. But it's actually a really magical thing that happens. It's almost like when the body heals itself. When you lose a critical team member, and you will for various reasons, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, but like this is the every pot has its lid thing, and if the lid doesn't fit the pot, the water's not going to boil. And so for me, when I've had managers move along, one, that is an amazing opportunity to find leadership on that team that already exists. Guaranteed they have a lieutenant, whether they are an introvert or an extrovert, whether it's known widely or not. And actually, again, another like product placement thing. I actually use small improvements for our performance reviews, but that's actually where I look to find who my natural leaders would be in a replacement situation. So one, you should never have a single point of failure, so hopefully you already have a contingency plan. But going back and actually looking at peer reviews and saying, what name keeps popping up on this team? Who are people really jazzed to work with? That person is likely going to be the person that people are already naturally looking to. So once again, by having some sort of apprenticeship or manager training program for people who have been interested in it, hopefully you have one of those in there. But if you don't, find the interim, whether that's the next level up, dipping down and taking charge for a period of time and managing the soft stuff. Two, bringing in your HR partners to help manage the soft skills while someone manages the technical skills. And then three, as you're hiring and bringing somebody in, every company has a different philosophy. The one that I've found that has worked best is actually to not hire in a manager immediately. You hire in someone that has managerial skills and also knows the technology of whatever their functional area is, and bring them in and let them work for a period of time, 30 days, 60 days, to come in, learn your team's culture, learn the technology, learn the language, and get the buy-in from the team. And then if you do the math right, the team should self-select them. So I personally don't hire in managers lower than director. People come in and they earn their spot, and it has not backfired yet. So 3 choices.
You're starting to talk about that right now, and I'm trying to get an idea of how you're defining leadership versus managerial experience, and how you're fostering that in the organization. So I think you're pointing to that right now, but maybe the other thought leaders can talk to what their organizations do to define leadership versus management.
I personally draw the line with specific personnel related responsibilities. You are a manager if you are responsible for compensation, career development, performance, in a way that is, affects the person's career. Whereas leaders can come from anywhere. We have leaders who are product managers, who are project managers, who are technical leads, where they're kind of the knowledge expert for their area of technology. We have this new thing that's started. A couple of our engineering teams have started having functional team meetings. Like the front end engineers will all get together for a meeting, and there's someone who has kind of risen up to be the leader of that meeting, which is kind of we're all working on different projects, but we all use the same set of technologies. Let's all talk about what we're working on and give each other ideas. But there's someone who leads that. And those types of leaderships don't come with personnel responsibilities. The closest thing would be like a product manager who is managing the workflow up to a product launch, but they still are not responsible for the overall trajectory of someone's career or their compensation or their specific performance. They might have performance feedback about how they performed during a launch or something, but I draw the line between leadership and management at like personnel responsibilities specifically.
Yeah, I would just echo that as well. I mean, that's how I've seen it in the past. I think the only thing to add is to have the recognition piece to reward or recognize that leadership, especially when someone doesn't have. They don't need to be doing it, but because they're doing it because they're passionate, they want to see their organization, their department, their group excel. So, yeah, plug. We used Small Improvements for that as well.
Thank you. What is the role of a manager? I mean, I think that is a great starting question. Would you all agree then with that? The personnel, the compensation, the hiring.
Yeah, I think the other piece of that, of course, is like the hiring and the building of the team. I don't think we have any hiring managers who are not also personnel managers. So that element of it, it's the hiring the people and then growing them when they are a member of your team.
And then I would say in sort of growing organizations, it's also with the help of HR, obviously, the person who's sort of deciding when there needs to be more structure, which like putting in more in between managers and adding, building out verticals within a team and figuring out if there's groupings of people who work together that would be their own team. So just sort of the building of structure within an org.
How are we doing time-wise? Do we have time for one more question? 2 more questions? Questions? Question mark? Awesome.
If no real, I guess, training programs have been implemented at your company, and you don't necessarily have a budget for them, what kind of resources or free advice can you guys give on ways to teach people things and also have it not come from like the top down, but make it seem like it's something that everybody will get, but it's not like the executive team is making you do this, but it's something that like the people want.
If you're a manager, the executive team should be making you do some sort of training. I think that is the right message. because it sends a message that the executive team cares about making good managers. And it is, I mean, our manager training I feel silly calling it a required training because it's something that I made up and teach by myself in 90 minutes, but it is a required training that is supported by the executive team, that all of our executives have been through themselves. And even with a small program like that, obviously that was free because I made it up, but I think there's a lot of resources online that you can tap into. Plug for my own organization that I run. I run a networking group called the Organization Organizers, or orgorg.co. It's a free community resource for people who work in this type of role. And there's a lot of resources that have been shared within the group. That's where I got my management hacks document, where people can share things that they've created. I think I compiled about 2/3 of my manager training based on other people's manager trainings that they had created. Borrowing from the community, I think, is a really good way to start if you are like up against the wall with no money and no resources, which I find myself in that position a lot. Trainings are expensive. There are people who are good at it, and those people are expensive. There are people who are bad at it, and they're expensive too. So it's about being really creative and finding books that you can get relatively cheaply, finding resources online that you can steal from. It's getting creative. I had a friend who worked at Jhana who gave me a free login. And so our entire People Ops team shares a Jhana login, and occasionally we take turns going in and downloading PDFs and then uploading them to our intranet. Like, I know, we're so bad.
May I remind you that this is being recorded?
They know. I don't even think she works there anymore. Sorry, Jhana. But that was one of the ways we developed our manager toolkit. Was they have free resources. There's nothing that says like these PDFs are not for download. Like, that's what they're there for. So we download them and we share them internally, and we create a toolkit that's part based on stuff from them, part based on things that community members have shared, part based on things we've just found online. And you just have to get really creative. But I would say you have to get creative in a very curated way. So know what you're trying to accomplish with these trainings. Know what is the problem. Again, the problem that you're trying to solve. And better communication is too broad. Like, you have to narrow it down to what is the skill that what is the skill gap we're trying to fill, and then really targeting resources for that specific thing, and then figuring out how your team will actually use them.
Awesome. Definitely plug for org. I've been a member, orger for 6 months now. Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. But besides for that, three things. It's an exciting time to be in HR People Ops right now. I love the spirit of sharing in forums like that, but some free resources. One through Google, there's something called Rework, work. Just loads of, mostly Google, but other companies sharing everything from managing to hiring, et cetera. Similar but different, there's something called HR Open Source, which is kind of just getting off the ground, but there's a lot of great material that's starting to show up there. And then it might be a little disjointed, but I just did a blog, because I like to do this, with a list of book recommendations for managers. So just look up my name, Bob Leto, on Medium. And Bob's Book Club, and hope you find some value. But with the danger, the one caveat of that is there's a lot of different management philosophies amongst those books. I recommended them all because they all spoke to me in different ways, but it really comes back to like, what's the right philosophy from, with your company, and you really need to get the philosophy that's going to work with your executive team. Otherwise, you're going to kind of be up against a wall, probably.
Yeah.
Sure. Hi, my name is Patrick. I just want to thank you for this discussion. It's been great. I wanted to ask, I have the opportunity to kind of like work and like build a small team, and they've never had like performance reviews before, and something I kind of want to do, and just wondering like if you've had the experience of introducing that into like an organization, like what's an effective way to do that for essentially a team that's never really had that before.
Yeah, so small improvements, invest in it. Yes, implementing a performance management structure is difficult, but the sooner you do it, the better. So actually, the smaller you are, the better. If there are two of you, review one another's performance. So it doesn't really matter what size you're starting. Obviously, the larger your organization, the more difficult it's going to be, because that's just a lot of education and a lot more communication that needs to happen. Because what you need first is alignment. Bob was just talking about this. It's about management philosophy, how you manage performance. Is this a performance results are the only thing that matters, or to your organization, is it also your behaviors? How embedded are your values into your performance management? So it really is about the structure of the actual program that you're implementing, less so the implementation of it, because that's tactical, and that's as simple as rolling out any other initiative. But finding, and this is where I will try to unplug a little bit, but finding a partner that you can really partner with in whatever tool you decide to use is critical. So for me, the first time I did it, I was at a company called Clout many, many moons ago, and Linda and Scott here helped me, there he is, helped me to build it from the ground up. So I was a first timer, I had never done it before. I did hit the resources, I talked to the people in Org, I talked to the people in Startup HR, but really I partnered with Small Improvements to help me understand how their tool could best be used within an organization. Because the beauty of working with a great partner is they actually know, they have been on the other side where they're working with multiple clients and multiple teams, whereas you have your view of one. So really finding partnership in that, and it's their responsibility. You are paying them, and they are very good at what they do. And so finding that partnership and building that relationship is critical. And oftentimes they will have cheat sheets for you. They will have tools that say, hey, here's the communication template for X, here's the communication template for Y. As you go along, here are the milestones, and these are the things that you should be communicating to the team. This goes to the managers, this goes to the whole company. Whatever that is, assuming that you can afford a software or a tool to use, that lean on them heavily, and you will learn everything in that first round, and then you just become partners throughout the engagement process of actually continuing to use the tool, whatever your system is. If you are building it for yourself, and I don't know if that is your question at all, but if you are building it without the help of a tool, rely on the network to help find the right questions, and then tailor it and continue to do what you do. At the end of the day, and sorry, this is the unplug part, it's about the conversation, not about what you use. As long as the conversation is happening, and I know that that's what Small Improvements believes philosophically, which is why they do the work that they do. But it really is about this conversation and helping to facilitate it so that it isn't this once a year or worse, never bit.
And just to add from the non-HR perspective, we push back against everything and we hate everything new, and then it turns out to be something we strongly rely on, and that it's a really, a year later, we can't even imagine that it wasn't there. So, sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, and it obviously is only about the good conversations and the meaningful feedback. There is a lot of tools out there, and there's not one right one that fits everyone as well. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you very much for the great questions. Please, thank you. Yes, yes.